And then finally Bob said the worst possible thing. From next month, clear out your room. When my mother gets discharged from the hospital, I'm gonna bring her straight to this house. Living together might make household chores easier, but I'll have to face my mother-in-law and endure her snide comments every single day. I was utterly devastated. I understand. He seems hell-bent on making this happen with his mother. Rather than arguing with him, it's better to discreetly take measures. I've learned that from years of experience. Bob left, not suspecting a thing, and seemed quite pleased. Everything is going according to my plan. It's so simple it's laughable. A few hours later, after tidying up and taking a break, my phone rang loudly. It was a frantic call from Bob. What the heck? The house is empty. I am Catherine Rose, a 45-year-old working mother and hold a managerial position at a publishing company. I have a husband and 2 kids. A typical American family. When I got married, the idea of balancing work and family was just beginning to gain traction. It was an era when it was common for women to marry and become homemakers. Bob had allowed me to work. In return, I've given my all to both my job and household chores. After having kids, I've been fully committed to raising them as well. But lately I've been feeling overwhelmed. My mother-in-law Mary, who was initially against me working, has started to complain recently. When are you gonna stop this job nonsense? Leaving your husband like that? You're such a terrible wife. Back in our day, the job came second. Our main duty was to dedicate ourselves to our homes. I've been working hard in both my career and home, raising the kids and managing household chores. I always thought of it as repaying the kindness Bob showed by supporting my career. Perhaps, seeing my dedication, both my daughter and son help around the house. My daughter does the laundry and ironing, while my son takes care of the bath and fills the tub every day. When I come home, I just have to prepare the meal and clean up. I'm so grateful to my kids, but even though we're both working, Bob doesn't lift a finger. I've asked him to help out several times, but Bob's answer was always the same. Catherine, I let you keep working, didn't I? You're trying to skip out on your wife duties and make me do the chores 'cause you want to have an easy life? Quit playing the victim. And every time, my mother-in-law would tattle on me and I'd get an earful from her. Bob is the breadwinner of the family, you know? And you're trying to make him do household chores? What are you thinking, Mary? This is why it's never good. For a woman to work, be grateful I even let you work. Understand your place. Lately, perhaps she's bored, but almost every night she calls with these snide remarks. It's become so frequent and unbearable that both my kids and I are fed up. My kids have even started pretending they are needed somewhere else to hang up the phone. Sure, I'm grateful they let me continue working, but why all this hostility? I've been the one handling both the household chores and raising the kids. She should know how hard it is to juggle both roles. What more does she want from me? Right now I'm under so much stress. The only saving grace is that my kids are on my side. The root cause of this is Bob's salary. Truth be told, Bob's pay isn't that great. It would probably be considered on the lower end. He had a tough time finding a job, and eventually landed one at a small company, thanks to a family connection. If he had shown some initiative, I wouldn't have cared about the low salary, and would have supported him wholeheartedly. But Bob got down on himself because of the way he got the job. I should have been working at a bigger, more renowned company. In the beginning, he used to mutter things like this. He only ever did the work given to him, never striving for promotions or looking for new job opportunities. Someone truly capable would have studied on the side or honed their skills to find better job opportunities. But Bob didn't, so he only ever got raises based on seniority. His performance-based bonuses were always the bare minimum. On the other hand, the company I work for is a nationwide corporation that had parental leave policies in place early on. It felt the effects of the economic bubble, but it's a reputable company that's managed to avoid major salary cuts. What's more, I've climbed up to the position of manager. I've successfully handled a significant number of contracts and projects. Naturally, I earn considerably more than Bob. I'm even covering our kids' expenses, using my paycheck to set aside money for their college funds. I've taken full advantage of the benefits of working for a large corporation. Looking back, I feel like I was living off my savings when I took parental leave for my 2 children and had no salary. With Bob's salary, there's no way he could cover all the living expenses with 2 kids. I don't recall ever receiving living expenses from Bob, and there's no record of any transfers. Maybe Bob let me continue working because he thought he could rely on my earnings. Lately, I've been thinking about this a lot. Ever since we got married, I've started to wonder if we've mostly been living off my salary. To confirm this suspicion, I looked at my bank book. The rent, utilities, groceries, and the kids' school expenses were all covered by my salary. School fees, I've been paying for all of it. There's not a single penny coming in from Bob's account. Eventually, I just laughed it off, feeling drained. Bob's salary is all gone, spent on his hobbies and giving pocket money to my mother-in-law. I've always thought that I owed Bob for letting me continue working. That's why I've been trying so hard with the household chores and childcare. But look at the situation now. I'm covering all the living expenses, while Bob spends his salary freely without saving a dime. When it comes to supporting our lives, wouldn't you say I'm the main breadwinner? Having me cover the living expenses while Bob does whatever he pleases, I'd say I've repaid the favor of letting me work. Yet Bob's catchphrase is, "I'm the one supporting y'all. If you've got a problem, just leave." What's he thinking, claiming he's the one supporting us? Is he thinking he's covering the living expenses while freely spending his own salary? It's a total mystery, and I just can't understand. If I, who's paying for everything, were to leave with the kids, what would happen? Or if I threw this bank book at him and told him to leave, would Bob just quietly go? But sticking to his claim that he's the main breadwinner, he'd probably tattle to my mother-in-law. I wonder if my mother-in-law knows about the difference in our salaries. No, if she knew, she probably wouldn't make those snide remarks. She must think he's a wonderful son, supporting his family, and even allowing his wife to work. If she knew about the difference in our salaries, what would she think? Would she ditch Bob and cozy up to me? Nah, that's the last thing I'd want. If Bob and I were to part ways, I wonder what would become of him, my mother-in-law. What would they do? Tired of the snide remarks from my mother-in-law, I often find myself pondering these thoughts. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law had an accident at her home and hurt her foot. It seems she's gonna need hospitalization and physical therapy for a while. My father-in-law passed away before Bob and I got married, so my mother-in-law has been living alone, so either Bob or I have to take care of my mother-in-law. Are you really going to leave me all by myself when I'm in such a state? Come to the hospital, Ed. My foot hurts so bad I can't move, and I've got a ton of things I need done. I quickly received a call from the hospitalized my mother-in-law. The moment I answered, she started with her demands, wanting this and that. I was at work, and whenever I tried to mention it, my mother-in-law would just lash out. I'm swamped with work, so I decided to let Bob handle her. Honestly, getting criticized by my mother-in-law for working is a huge stressor. Right now, it's best if Bob visits the hospital to cheer up my mother-in-law. When I asked Bob to care for my mother-in-law, he immediately began to complain. "Hey, Catherine, why aren't you looking after Mom? I'm working too, you know." Despite being his mother, he just tosses all the caregiving responsibilities to his wife. Wouldn't one think to at least visit her once or twice on their own? Holding back my frustration, I replied, "I have work too, Bob, plus all the chores at home. If you'd help around the house, maybe I could visit her. More importantly, I think your mom would be happier if it was you who came to care for her." This is true, though some may vent their stress by snapping at their daughter-in-law. When one is immobile, it's better to think and talk positively. So I kept finding reasons to avoid caring for my mother-in-law. Instead, I would neatly wash and fold her laundry and pack it in a bag. If she asked for something specific, I'd buy it, after checking the name of the products she requested. Even if Bob took credit for those things and I got the blame, I didn't mind. I just didn't want to hear her snide remarks. Thankfully, it seems my judgment was right. She greets Bob with a big smile every day. Apparently for a mother like her, nothing beats the joy of being cherished by her son. Having her beloved son around must feel much better than dealing with a daughter-in-law she'd want to make sarcastic comments about. Every day, it seems like she waits for Bob to come home from work. She must be really focused on chatting with him. She even hands him a shopping list note. And she hasn't called me since the first time she was admitted to the hospital. Seeing her smiling, Bob probably feels he's being a good son. Even after he gets home, he's in a good mood. At night, when he returns, he simply hands me the laundry and shopping notes without any complaints. When handing over her stuff, he throws in some sarcastic remarks at me, but still, I was able to live peacefully. Honestly, I just don't want to hear any of her complaints right now. That's what I murmured to myself in the middle of the night. It'd be nice if things could stay peaceful for a while. But injuries take a toll at her age. Through Bob, I was pushing hard for her rehab, but she, delighted with his visits, tended to skip it. As a result, by the time her injury healed, her legs had become weak. Bob would visit her in the evening after his work. Yet she would skip her daytime rehab, just waiting in her room for his visit. And after getting a taste of his care, she started making all sorts of requests from him. She rarely calls on me directly, but when it comes to her needs, she always asks Bob. When it comes to household chores, I am the one who takes care of things like laundry. Running errands, doing laundry, and even bringing her snacks have become a daily routine for me. While my mother-in-law sat in her hospital room chatting cheerfully with her son, I was the one doing all the housework. It was a relief not to see my mother-in-law, but I was exhausted from all the tasks she would ask of me. Shopping alone was a significant chore, and I couldn't understand why she needed so much stuff. I knew hospitals could be boring, but her constant requests were becoming overwhelming. It seemed that my mother-in-law had also realized the inconvenience of living alone with weak legs. She made a shocking request to Bob, asking him not to leave her alone. Of course, Bob sided with her and suggested that we all live together. It was decided without consulting me, and then Bob broke the worst news to me. He would be living with his mother, starting next month. And I needed to clear out my room. From an efficiency standpoint, it made sense for my mother-in-law to live with us. But for me, it meant having to see her every day and being nagged at constantly. I felt extremely downcast, but Bob acted like it was already a done deal. I replied with little energy, knowing that he was determined to force this co-living situation, regardless of how I felt. I knew from experience that it would be better to secretly make plans rather than argue about it now. While Bob and my mother-in-law happily planned for the move, I constantly thought about how I could escape. I have my own room where I work and keep my materials. It's essential for me, whether you call it a study or an office. But Bob wants me to give it up, and without this room, my work would be impacted. I might even have to come home later than I do now. As I stared at my bookshelf, I muttered to myself, wondering where I would move all my books and documents. I couldn't leave them at home if we lived with my mother-in-law. They were too important to risk getting thrown away or damaged. It may sound like something out of a TV drama, but I truly feared that she would throw them out, especially since she would likely target what she knew was important to me. And if I dared to complain, she would feign ignorance and run to Bob for support, claiming she didn't know they were important. There would be no peace for me in this house once we started living together. I could already see her bossing me around and making snide remarks about my work, wearing me out. What should I do? If my mother-in-law is coming to this house, I had a sudden realization. Why hadn't I thought of this simple solution before? It seems living with my mother-in-law and all her nagging wore me down more than I realized. It felt like the fog before my eyes was gradually clearing up. Well, of course, there's absolutely no need for me to hold back. Why didn't I realize something so simple? I mumbled to myself, and immediately began making preparations. And as the month changed, the day of my mother-in-law's discharge from the hospital arrived. Bob was all excited, having taken the day off from the start of the morning. Hey, you better take proper care of my mom from now on. Don't think I'm gonna step in like I did when she was in the hospital, he said in a commanding tone. Without responding to Bob's order, I changed the subject. Oh, speaking of which, here. Your mom's been in the hospital for quite a while, right? Hospital food is bland, and they don't give you much. I bet a gourmet like her wasn't satisfied. I think the discharge process and packing will take up the morning, so why don't you take her out for some good food? You took the day off after all. How about a nice drive, just the two of you? I think she'd really appreciate it. I handed Bob a generous amount of cash. I'd set aside some money for living expenses and even Bob's personal spending, but this was more than his monthly allowance. Surprised by the unexpected bonus, Bob's spirits lifted even higher. Well, aren't you thoughtful? Alright, I'll use this money and go for a drive with my mom. I'll give you a call when we decide about dinner. Make sure the house is in tip-top shape for my mom, alright? Without a hint of suspicion, Bob happily left. Everything was going just as I had planned. It was almost too simple, I couldn't help but laugh. This should buy me some time. I'm looking forward to when Bob and my mother-in-law return. With that, I continued tidying up the house. I had to finish cleaning before Bob and my mother-in-law came back. A few hours later, just as I was taking a break after finishing up, my cell phone began ringing loudly. The call came in a flustered tone from Bob. Hey, what's going on? The house is empty. That's right. After Bob went to pick up my mother-in-law, I moved all our stuff to the new house we just rented. Of course, I left some of Bob's personal belongings and a bed for my mother-in-law in the room. Oh, you back already? You told me to clear out the room, so I emptied both the room and the living room. The living room and kitchen are totally empty. After all I've done to support this family, how could you? There it was, his go-to line. He seemed to believe that saying this put him in a superior position. Panais. No, Bob, I've been the one supporting the family, including you. Weren't you spending your paycheck on pocket money for your mom and your own hobbies? And yet you demand an allowance from the family budget. How does that make you the breadwinner? Bob seemed surprised by my resistance, but he retorted nonetheless. His argument, however, was nonsensical. Shut it, I'm the man here. I'm the head of this household. You, as my wife, should just do as I say. Now put everything back the way it was. No thanks. I bought all the furniture in the living room and all the kitchenware with my salary. The kids are with me, so don't worry. I also paid for the rent, utilities, and groceries of that house. So, in reality, I'm the breadwinner. Why did you decide to live with your mom without consulting me? I can't live with someone so selfish. As you wished, you can be the main provider now. Live your life as you please. It seemed that Bob finally realized my intentions. Hold on, are you saying the rent for this place? I've paid up until the end of this month, but from next month, you'll need to handle it. I've also canceled all the automatic payments for electricity, gas, and the internet. So good luck with that. Bob's words probably tipped me off to the situation. My mother-in-law also started making a racket in a loud voice. How could you do this, Catherine? Just because you have a job, doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Fine, Bob and I will live here in luxury. Oh, does my mother-in-law not know about Bob's earnings? I hope you can have that luxurious life. That is, if your son can afford it. Anyway, goodbye. Wait, Catherine, where are you right now? I didn't bother listening to the rest of Bob's rant. I hung up and blocked both Bob and my mother-in-law's numbers. The rest is probably as you'd imagine. With the meager salary from his uninspiring job at a small company, Bob was left with very little after paying the rent and utilities. Living in a needlessly spacious apartment where a family of 4 once lived, Bob and my mother-in-law would constantly bicker. What's with this meal? Can't you provide something better for your mother? Shut up, if you want something else, make it yourself. You're just making excuses, saying walking is too hard after slacking off on your rehab. You don't do anything at home, Mom. You're just wasting time. Having neglected her rehab, my mother-in-law's legs had become weak, and she refused to do any home workouts. Could my legs not move as I wanted, causing my frustration? She started imposing unreasonable demands on Bob, whom she had cherished so much. Maybe she's showing early signs of Alzheimer's. Even adding my mother-in-law's pension, it feels like they're living in poverty. They'd be better off if they moved to a smaller place fit for 2. But it seems Bob hasn't thought of that. He probably tried to contact me numerous times, but I've blocked all communication from both Bob and my mother-in-law since that incident. Of course, my kids did the same, blocking their numbers when we moved. Bob doesn't know our new address, and he can't ask for help. Their living situation will probably collapse soon. I was earning a decent income with the help of my children, so I managed to lease a nice apartment. Each of my kids has their own room. I secured a spacious room that doubles as a bedroom and workspace. The rent might be a tad high, but with Bob out of the picture, I'm saving more than enough. My kids, who are tired of being belittled by their father, are now living freely. They've become more helpful around the house. Helping out without being criticized by their father makes chores feel good, they say. Everywhere, isn't it normal to praise and thank kids when they help? I'm glad my children haven't become bitter. I was headed back to the apartment where my kids awaited. Later, through a lawyer, I served Bob with divorce papers. I lived on my salary, while he spent all his earnings solely on himself and my mother-in-law. That's a valid reason for divorce in my book. Bob tried to argue against the divorce with various points, but my lawyer cut him off every time. The fact he claimed to be the breadwinner but didn't contribute was labeled as verbal abuse and clear financial abuse. If it went to court, Bob wouldn't stand a chance. I got custody of the kids, naturally. In exchange for not seeking alimony and child support, we agreed on no property division. After all, the savings we had for the kids' college were from my earnings. I couldn't let Bob and my mother-in-law take that. The car was in my name, and our house was rented. I'm grateful we didn't buy a house. Now I can focus on my job without complaints. I want to support my kids in whatever they want to do. With the money saved for college and my future earnings, I should be able to cover their tuition. Alright, I'm gonna work hard today. My first impression upon seeing my sister-in-law for the first time was that she was an extremely charming person with striking features. Nice to meet you, my name is Catherine. But just when I thought I wanted to get along with her, that feeling quickly faded in the next moment. Who is this old lady? Is she my brother's wife's mother? The atmosphere became tense when my sister-in-law not only interrupted my greeting, but also referred to me as an old lady. From this day my hellish days began. My name is Catherine Johnson. I'm just an ordinary 30-year-old housewife. 4 years ago, I was a career woman totally engrossed in my job. Not to brag, but I was quite popular at the office. I achieved many accomplishments and was admired by my subordinates, superiors, and clients alike. My husband Bob was one of them. Bob and I would often meet since we dealt with each other's companies. The start of our friendship was at a party with Bob's company when he initiated a conversation with me. It seems my reputation had reached Bob's company too. According to Bob, he wanted to see for himself if the rumors about me were true, so he decided to join the business meeting with me. At first he was skeptical, but as we worked together, he fell in love with my strong core and way of life. He felt that I was the only one for him. When I heard that he was determined to make me fall for him, I thought it was cute, like something a high schooler would do. As for me, I had been smitten from the very beginning. You see, Bob had such striking features and was incredibly popular among women. Embarrassingly, Bob was just my type, so I had a secret crush on him. We were business partners, so I kept a certain distance. However, after Bob asked me out on numerous dates, we dated for a year, and then got married. Our married life was smooth, and every day was blissful. Every morning, while I was preparing breakfast, Bob would wake up with a gentle look on his face and say, "Good morning," and give me a warm hug. It became our daily routine. Despite being older, his childlike behavior always tickled my maternal instincts. Furthermore, Bob and I have never had an argument. And why would we? Bob never gets mad. When I accidentally broke a plate, he was more concerned about me than the plate. I always think about how kind he truly is. Both of us wanted a child, so after getting married, I decided to quit my job to focus on starting a family. Any child of Bob and me is bound to be adorable. I constantly thought about names, especially if it was a girl. Time flew by, and this year marks our 3rd anniversary. We haven't been blessed with a child, but we were still happy. Except for one thing. Bob's family home housed his mother and younger sister. His father passed away from cancer before we got married. His mother is always cheerful and has been very kind to me. I believe Bob's kindness comes from his mother. However, his sister was different. I really didn't like her. Thinking back, it started from the time I first introduced myself before we got married. My first impression of her was that she was a very charming person with striking features just like Bob. I had briefly thought I wanted to get along with her, but that feeling vanished in the next instant. "Nice to meet you, my name is Catherine," I said. "Who's this old lady? Is she my brother's wife's mother?" Not only did she cut off my greeting, but the atmosphere went cold in an instant when my sister-in-law called me an old lady. My sister-in-law didn't greet me back, so Bob stepped in to introduce me. "No way, seriously? That's hilarious. I thought you were like 50. You really look old." That was way out of line. I genuinely doubted if this girl was Bob's sister. She blatantly stared at me from head to toe, sizing me up. I just watched her in silence until she furrowed her brow. Whether she disliked my face or my attitude, I couldn't tell, but she kept making snide remarks about my appearance. "Your clothes are so out of style, you're overweight, your nails are unkempt," and more. After a while, I just stared down at my own feet. Bob's hands trembled with rage while his sister laughed continuously. Then Bob snapped, something he rarely does. "Hey, what the hell are you saying?" he said. She responded with, "What? You're so annoying. You totally killed the mood." She's just plain nasty, and she would make these same types of snide comments to Bob and their mother. They had put up with her behavior for years without expecting any change in her attitude. Both Bob and his mother apologized to me later. They weren't at fault. So why were they apologizing? I felt sorry for them. But at the same time, I harbored anger towards the sister-in-law for making such remarks to her own family. To minimize contact, I decided not to visit Bob's family home anymore. I heard about the sister-in-law through their mother, but she never caused any harm to us. So I went on, living my life peacefully. Then one day, an incident shattered my happy daily life. "Catherine, Bob, I have a favor to ask. I'm planning to move to a senior housing facility in 6 months, and I was wondering if I could stay with you until then." Bob's mother injured her back, which was no surprise given her frail health. It's clear that the sister-in-law is to blame. Despite the fact that their mother already had trouble carrying groceries, the sister-in-law who lived with her refused to help, and would even make her mother carry her shopping bags. That's the level of her selfishness. It's inevitable that the mother's health will deteriorate. I just can't understand why the mother doesn't just kick her out of the house. Is it because she's her daughter? Maybe no matter how bad the child is, a mother's love knows no bounds. I'm all for living with the mother, but only if it's just her. If we live with her, it means the sister-in-law comes with the package. Accepting this was the last thing I wanted, but I was concerned about the mother's health. So I felt I had no choice but to accept the sister-in-law moving in too. As I'd expected, living together was hell. From morning to night, the sister-in-law would only spew venom, especially towards me. When I cooked, she would make comments like, "This tastes so bad," or "How can you even make such trash?" And then she would ruthlessly throw the food in the trash. Whenever I folded her clothes, she would always find something to complain about. Sometimes she would even say things like, "You need to iron this properly." Her attitude was like that of a rebellious teenager. In fact, she never even mentioned anything about how I folded or ironed her clothes. The sister-in-law has a habit of twisting words to fit her own narrative. When cleaning the room, I have to be thorough, especially in the corners. Otherwise, the sharp-tongued comments from my sister-in-law start. "Hey, there's still dust over there. You know, you're pretty much the maid here, so do it right. You're so useless." Even though my sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger, she's quick to point out any flaws. I silently wonder when I'll be able to escape this hell. As I continued cleaning, she added, "Poor Bob. You can't even manage household chores, so the least you can do is have a child. I wonder why you were even born a woman." "Excuse me? What's your problem?" I couldn't let that comment slide. I had always held my tongue, but this was too much. But I didn't say anything more. Or rather, I couldn't. The look on my sister-in-law's face was terrifying, as if she was looking at something evil. I was looking at something filthy. The pressure was so intense, I couldn't help but look down. It was frightening. It was infuriating. All these feelings were swirling inside me, and all I could do was hold back the tears. Then my sister-in-law left the room, laughing smugly. One day, my sister-in-law came home in a great mood. When my mother-in-law asked why, my sister-in-law eagerly began to brag. Apparently, her boyfriend had proposed. She boasted that he is tall, handsome, and earns a high income. She immediately approached me and brought up my inability to have children. While I am on top of the world, losers like you should fulfill their roles as women by having kids. She laughed at me with that familiar mocking tone. It was shocking. She didn't have to say that in front of Bob and my mother-in-law. Bob got angry at my sister-in-law's comments, but she wouldn't listen. Suddenly I felt nauseous. With tears in my eyes, I rushed to the bathroom. From behind I heard her say, "Pathetic." But I felt so sick that I didn't care. From the living room, I could hear Bob and my sister-in-law arguing. My mother-in-law was beside me, patting my back, and said, "Children are a blessing. It's up to you and Bob to decide the pace." She comforted me with tears in her eyes. I wished from the bottom of my heart that my sister-in-law would get married and leave as soon as possible. On another day, after a routine visit to the OBGYN, I decided to take a detour on my way home. There was a popular flower shop nearby that was always bustling. I was thinking about buying some flowers when an old colleague, Steve, called out to me. Even though I've left my old job, Steve still looks up to me. We occasionally chat on text discussing work matters. It's been 3 years since we last met. We chatted for a bit, and he told me he's going to marry his girlfriend soon. They have a date planned later that day. I was curious about why Steve was at the flower shop, but it soon became clear. Seeing Steve talk so happily about his girlfriend made me smile too. Realizing it was time to go, Steve picked out his flowers and went to pay. While waiting, I browsed the flowers, deciding which to buy. When Steve returned, he had 2 bouquets in his hands. He handed one to me as a gift. "This is for you. It's baby's breath. The flower's meaning is gratitude and happiness. I've always been grateful for you, Catherine. Please continue to be there for me." Saying that, Steve headed toward the train station. Gratitude and happiness, huh? Never having chosen flowers based on their meaning, I thought Steve was a warm-hearted person. I hurried home. I wanted to tell my husband about today's events as soon as possible. When I got home, my sister-in-law wasn't there. It seems she'd gone out. I placed the baby's breath in a vase and prepared dinner with my mother-in-law. It felt peaceful and joyful to have some time, just the 3 of us, after so long. With my sister-in-law gone, my mother-in-law was watching her favorite TV show that starts every day at 7 p.m. That night, I told my husband about the day's happenings, and we both went to bed with smiles on our faces. The next day, my sister-in-law came home in the morning. She had a bouquet of roses in her hand, which she suddenly threw at me. She said, "Put these in a vase," and then went to her room. I tried to put the thrown bouquet into a vase, but most of the flowers were broken or the petals were torn, so they ended up in the trash. I wondered how roughly she had handled them. I began to feel sorry for my sister-in-law's boyfriend. On closer inspection, I recognized the wrapping of the bouquet. After changing into her house clothes, my sister-in-law started talking again. "Hey, I'm bringing my boyfriend over this Saturday. Make sure you dress decently, okay? Honestly, I wouldn't even want him to see you in your usual tacky outfits." Her words irked me, but the thought that my time with her would be short brought some relief. On the appointed day, Bob and I were out shopping because my sister-in-law had asked us to. My mother-in-law texted to say that my sister-in-law's fiancé had arrived in our absence. She probably didn't want me meeting her fiancé. When we returned, the living room was bustling. When I went to greet them, my sister-in-law glaringly looked at me. I accidentally made eye contact with the fiancé. After a brief mutual gaze, my sister-in-law, seemingly disliking it, said, "Don't just stand there. The tea's gotten cold. Go get a fresh one." Her fiancé tried to help, but she stopped him. My mother-in-law mentioned the beautiful roses and baby's breath in the vase, to which my sister-in-law made a snide remark. "Why is your flower and the one I got from my boyfriend in the same vase? It's awful. Separate them or throw them out. Your flower is colorless and not cute at all." She took the baby's breath from the vase and dropped it onto the floor. As I served the refreshed tea and placed the baby's breath in another vase, my sister-in-law's taunts continued. Apparently annoyed by my silence, she deliberately spilled the tea I had poured, staining the floor. The floor we had just cleaned with my mother-in-law that morning was now stained brown. From my viewpoint, I could see my sister-in-law's nervous fidgeting. She looked quite agitated. Bob brought a cloth and helped me wipe the floor. "Bob, you don't have to get dirty for her. Come on, let's sit and chat." The atmosphere was tense. Did my sister-in-law not realize that her words were backfiring on her? Her fiancé, who had been observing the situation, tried to defend me with his words. But of course, my sister-in-law wasn't having any of it. "Why are you defending her? You should only be looking at me," she exclaimed, past the point of no return. "Isn't she your sister?" her fiancé asked, seeking clarification. In response, my sister-in-law uttered her usual demeaning phrase. "Nah, she's just the maid here, so it's okay." My mother-in-law tried to silence my sister-in-law, but as expected, it was to no avail. She just went on and on with her usual nasty comments. Once she was done ranting with a satisfied look on her face, her fiancé looked straight at her and said something. "Let's break up." "What?" Steve was livid. No wonder, after all, he was Steve. I kinda guessed that my sister-in-law was engaged to Steve. The bouquet of roses my sister-in-law brought home was the same one Steve had bought just the other day. Catherine is a senior colleague at my workplace, someone I respect, and who is kinder than anyone else. And about that baby's breath flower you said wasn't cute, I sent it to Catherine. Sorry for my bad taste. Wait a minute, I had no idea you two worked together. My gleeful sister-in-law began to panic. Just because you didn't know, you think you can mock him? I've always heard about you being so mean. But Catherine isn't like that. Steve's gaze was cold. My mother-in-law looked down, while my husband stood by my side, glaring at my sister-in-law. Everyone in the room looked utterly disappointed in my sister-in-law. Seeing this, my sister-in-law looked at me with wide eyes, begging for support. "This isn't a joke, right? Tell me it's not." She pulled on my collar so hard it stretched my shirt. I firmly shook off my sister-in-law's hand. "I've always put up with your snide remarks. After all you've done, don't come to me for help now." For the first time, I laid bare my emotions towards my sister-in-law. "You've got to be kidding me. You can't do anything right. You can't even have kids. You're finished as a woman." As my sister-in-law tried to slap me, Bob stepped in and grabbed her hand. Bob, who had remained silent until now, grabbed a cup of tea and poured it over my sister-in-law's head in anger. He then shouted at her in a low, booming voice. Bob began to recount the truth about our struggles to conceive. It wasn't me who couldn't have children, it was Bob. Bob himself. Bob had male infertility. After diligent treatment, it was cured. And now I was carrying our baby. Furious at my sister-in-law's comment, Bob shouted at her to apologize immediately. Seeing her brother truly angry for the first time, my sister-in-law was so startled she fell on her butt. "What's going on? Mom, you're on my side, right?" My sister-in-law tightly grasped my mother-in-law's hand, clinging to her leg in a comical manner. But she was shrugged off. "I'm done with you. I've let a lot slide because you're my daughter. But I've reached my limit. Leave this house now. You're the worst daughter. You ungrateful brat." My sister-in-law, thinking her mother was her last ally, was abandoned by even her. Clearly, even she was taken aback by this. She ran to her room crying. Steve said he would contact us later, and left the house. My mother-in-law hugged me and said, "You endured so much, you did well," while patting my head. My mother-in-law, hearing for the first time that I was pregnant, cried with a smile, saying, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Congratulations. Bob apologized for not protecting me properly. It was a tumultuous few minutes, but I felt refreshed having finally expressed my feelings to my sister-in-law. I'll never forget what happened today. Later, my mother-in-law moved to a senior living community, and the family home was sold. Bob and I decided to move closer to my mother-in-law. We wanted her to watch our child grow up. I haven't heard anything about my sister-in-law since. After that, Bob dragged his reclusive sister out of the room and forcefully threw her out of the house, belongings and all. No one has been in touch with the sister-in-law, so nobody knows where she is or what she's up to. I got a message from Steve via text that he had sent a letter and some flowers. A bouquet of baby's breath had just arrived in the mail. I put the bouquet of baby's breath into a vase and started reading the letter. Catherine, I'm so sorry for my late response. How have you been feeling? Congratulations on your pregnancy. It was such unexpected happy news that it even made me happy. The letter went on to discuss his relationship with the sister-in-law after that incident. It seems that Steve and the sister-in-law had met once after the event. This was because it later came to light that the sister-in-law had been two-timing. Steve found out when the other man she was seeing contacted him. Since then, he's cut ties and they're no longer in touch. If they had gotten married, he would have surely regretted it. The letter was filled with his gratitude. I should be the one thanking Steve. But he really is a sincere young man. I truly hope he finds happiness. The end of my sister-in-law, who bullied me relentlessly, was unexpected. Through these events, I realized how one's actions, good or bad, come back to oneself based on how you treat others. I hope my child will be filled with compassion and understanding. End of the call. Hello? You can come over? I noticed the video call hadn't ended completely. As I tried to end it, my husband was making a call to someone. I found his overly familiar demeanor puzzling. Peeking with my in-laws, I witnessed an unexpected move by my husband. My name is Catherine Johnson. I'm a 36-year-old housewife. Currently, live with my in-laws and our 3 children. My husband was assigned overseas for 3 years, and I was apprehensive about raising the children alone during this period. I worried about potential illnesses or injuries. After discussing my concerns with my husband, we decided to move in with my in-laws. My husband Bob and I have been classmates dating since high school. I've known my in-laws since then. We decided to marry once we were financially stable after graduating from college, and we got married when I was 24. Bob wanted to support the family soon, so he joined a large company. He was ambitious and was highly regarded even though he had just started. Therefore, we were able to get married sooner than planned. Both our parents looked forward to our wedding. They were delighted at our ceremony. Both families got along well, having interactions even before our marriage, feeling just like one big family. Both parents were very pleased with our wedding, and whenever I remember the ceremony, it brings back happy memories. On my side, aside from my parents, I have an older brother, 3 years my senior. He lives far away and we occasionally meet. He sees Bob as a real younger brother, and they've been close since school. They both played sports in school and even enjoy watching games together. When our children were born, he was thrilled, always bringing gifts, such a caring brother. However, tragedy struck when our parents passed away in an accident shortly after our first child was born. The last time I saw them, they were beaming with joy, eagerly waiting to see their grandchild grow. Their faces were full of hope for the future and believing in continued happiness, which is my last memory of them. I had always looked forward to doing things with my parents and my newborn child. But, just as they were in such high spirits, they were taken from me suddenly in an accident. Preparing for their funeral with my older brother, I was so shocked that I felt numb for quite a while. My memories of that period are blurry. During the funeral, I was naturally overwhelmed by a sense of loss. I remember weeping quietly, with tears streaming down my face nonstop. My brother desperately tried to comfort me as I grieved deeply, but I felt like I wasn't truly present. Even after the funeral, it was my husband Bob who supported me. Even though Bob was close with my parents and grieved their loss, and despite his busy work schedule and taking care of our child, he was there for me. Seeing how Bob handled everything, I realized I couldn't stay like this and began to slowly recover. When I apologized for the burden I had placed on him during that time, Bob just laughed. Couples are there to support each other during tough times. It's a given for me to be there for you, Catherine. It's only natural to put on a brave face for our family, even if it's hard, said Bob. Inspired by Bob's attitude, I vowed to do my best for our family. My in-laws, knowing how devastated I was during that period, became even more concerned about me. Catherine, we consider you our very own daughter. Please don't hesitate to rely on us. We're here to help and support you anytime, they would tell me. Knowing them, I was reassured that living together would be worry-free. So we canceled our apartment contract, completed the necessary paperwork to transfer our child's preschool, and moved into my in-laws' home. Our kids are attached to their grandparents, so we changed preschools for them to live together, but they didn't seem to mind. The house is a 2-story owned property that Bob had built when he was young. It was designed to be child-friendly and to be their residence in their old age, with attention to accessibility, making it a safe home for small children. The house is slightly bigger than our previous apartment, and given our young kids, moving in didn't pose any problems. Our old apartment wasn't 2-story, so initially, the kids found the stairs fascinating, and often played on them together. I was concerned about how the change in environment might affect them, but seeing them play so energetically eased my worries. Even though they had to switch preschools, they seemed to adjust well and made new friends quickly. Though I was anxious they might fall ill from the changes, they've been healthy, which puts me at ease. Ever since we moved to New York, we've been living harmoniously with my in-laws, supporting one another. At first, since I was a stay-at-home mom, I intended to handle all the household chores. However, my in-laws proposed we share the responsibilities. While I took care of preparing meals, my mother-in-law did the laundry, though sometimes we'd switch roles. Apparently she's not great at cooking, so she was relieved, and she even complimented my dishes. The house cleaning was shared between my in-laws and me, freeing up more of my time. I now get to spend more time with my kids, and I believe I've become more attuned to their subtle changes. The only issue, if it can be called that, is the kids missing their playtime with Bob. They adore him, and whenever he had time he used to dote on them a lot. Despite his tiring job, Bob would sometimes tell me to take a break and handle some chores. He works hard, both at his job and with the kids, so much that I sometimes worried if he was resting enough. Even though you work and handle house chores, are you sure you're getting enough rest? When I asked Bob this, he assured me he was fine. Bob is gentle, family-oriented, and has a bright and cheerful demeanor. Being overseas, it's not so easy to travel back and forth, and in the span of 3 years, he only came back to the States once. Video calls with Bob while he's on his overseas assignment are something my kids and I really look forward to. With a 14-hour time difference, finding a common time can be tricky, but we try to video call at least once a month. We also exchange emails regularly, but nothing beats seeing each other's faces. We're always curious about his life abroad and want to ensure he's okay. Recently, the kids have grown more interested in the glimpses of foreign settings and Bob's stories during these calls. Today at 9 p.m. we're scheduled for a video call with Bob. The kids, eager to talk to their father, have even taken naps to ensure they stay awake. As I set up the computer for the call, the kids line up properly and soon start a lively conversation with Bob. "Been a while, how have you been?" When Bob's face appeared on the screen and I called out to him, the kids responded with joyous voices. "Hey Dad, we're doing well. Guess what?" They began, animatedly using their hands to emphasize their points. Bob listened with a delighted expression. I had so much I wanted to discuss with Bob, but I decided to wait until the kids were asleep. My in-laws and I watched the conversation with warm smiles. Bob mentioned he had work later, but it sounded like he had about 2 hours to spare. After the kids, I was hoping to have some one-on-one time with my husband. Thanks to the consistent help from my in-laws, there were things that were difficult to discuss, or issues I had been facing that I really wanted to share with Bob. About 30 minutes into the video call, perhaps because of their energetic chatter, the kids began to look sleepy. Even though they had taken a nap, it was around their usual bedtime, so they were likely tired. Yet they seemed to still have more to say and were trying their best to stay awake. The youngest is mostly asleep, occasionally jolting awake, but quickly succumbing to drowsiness again. Seeing them in such a state, Bob gently suggested they go to bed. "Getting sleepy, huh? Just 1 more month and Dad'll be coming back to New York. We'll chat loads then." Bob's overseas assignment was coming to an end in a month. The kids were eagerly awaiting his return, but they still seemed to have so much to say. "Remember, you have school and preschool tomorrow. Let's call it a night. My in-laws and I also persuaded the kids, and soon they were off to bed. As the drowsy kids waved goodbye, Bob waved back. As I stood to take the kids to their rooms, my in-laws quietly offered, "You two probably have a lot to talk about. Leave the kids with us, and take your time." Holding our youngest, who had fallen asleep, my in-laws walked the other kids to their rooms by the hand. Grateful for my mother-in-law's words, I settled in to chat with Bob. Even in just a month, it's easy to notice how much kids grow. When it came to talking about the kids, the topics were endless. At the parent-teacher conference, they seemed to be having a great time. When the teacher asked them a question, they answered confidently. They proudly told me all about it afterwards. It was adorable. Ever since our eldest started elementary school, with Bob being overseas, he's always looked forward to attending those conferences. I've been sending pictures regularly, but he always wants a detailed account during our calls. Seeing how much Bob values our family and takes joy in the kids' milestones always reminds me of how fortunate I am to have married such a wonderful man, and I cherish our current happiness. Besides updates about the kids, we also discussed some challenges, concerns, and future plans. After a while, my in-laws joined back in our conversation. Before we knew it, it was midnight. Bob had work to start, and we had an early day ahead, so we wrapped up the call. "Good night. You have work now, so take care," I said, intending to end the call. However, I mistakenly only turned off my camera, leaving the call still active. Realizing I hadn't fully disconnected, my drowsy brain scrambled to properly end the call. "Call's over? Hello? I'm done with the family call. You can come over now," I said. Then, without noticing the computer screen, Bob started making a call to someone. He had said he was about to get ready for work, but now he's inviting someone over? Moreover, the way he spoke was quite friendly, giving me an uneasy feeling and making me hesitant to end it. It felt not just friendly, but there was a kind of sweetness, as if he was speaking to a lover. "What's going on?" Noticing my reaction, my in-laws asked, curious. I thought he was heading to work, but it seems like he invited someone over. "It's bothering me." I felt guilty about eavesdropping, even though he's my husband, but I told them I just wanted to check who was coming. Seeing Bob's behavior on the phone, it seemed like my mother-in-law felt the same way and agreed with me. So we decided to watch together. Although I had a bad feeling, I reassured myself, thinking, maybe he's just close with a coworker and I'm overthinking this. However, a foreign woman walked into the house, chatting familiarly with Bob, and even touching him. No matter the cultural differences between the US and other countries, you wouldn't just invite a woman into your home, or be this intimate. I instinctively looked at my in-laws, and both had a grim expression. They murmured in disbelief, watching the video as if seeing something inexplicable. But just as I thought maybe I was overreacting and it was just cultural differences, the two clearly began to engage in infidelity. "Wait, what?" Seeing Bob's shocking behavior, I was more calm than angry, and quickly pressed the record button. My in-laws had a mix of guilt towards me and anger towards Bob on their faces. "Catherine, are you okay? You don't have to watch this if it's too hard," my mother-in-law said, concerned about me, who was visibly shaking. Even in this situation, the care from my in-laws brought some comfort. "I need to see this for evidence." "I'm fine," I assured her, and continued to watch. While I felt disgusted and angry about being cheated on, I was surprisingly calm. After the appalling act, the two began to talk on the bed. From their conversation, it was evident that the woman knew Bob was married, and it seemed to be a relationship limited to his time abroad. "Thanks for taking me on that trip the other time." "No problem. Thanks to your guidance, I had a great time." It turned out Bob had taken the woman on a trip recently. The destination was a place our kids had expressed interest in, and we had talked about visiting as a family someday. And since they had no acquaintances abroad, they seemed to have enjoyed their trip without any inhibitions. "But you covered the expenses, right? Is the money okay?" The woman spoke worriedly about money, seeming nervous about her affair being discovered. Unbelievably, Bob had been telling me he earned less than he actually did, and he had confided in me that he had been spending the extra on his leisure. Apparently, his company has 2 payroll locations. With this shocking revelation, all of Bob's past actions started to seem suspicious. My trust in Bob seemed to shatter audibly. By the time I finished observing Bob's behavior, it was past 2 a.m. Stunned by the shocking truth, the three of us were speechless. "Let's get some sleep for now, and then think about what's next," my father-in-law muttered, and we decided to head to our bedrooms. Once in bed, I was wide awake, unable to sleep. Bob had always been caring, proactive in work and childcare, and kind. We've known each other since high school, so I thought I understood him pretty well. I never thought that the Bob I knew was a lie, but with recent events, I felt I no longer knew him. I had always believed he would never cheat. And if it were just eyewitness accounts or photos, I probably wouldn't have believed he was having an affair. But having seen the scene on a video call, I was in shock and my thoughts were frozen. Gradually, various emotions towards Bob began to well up. I found myself wiping away tears that wouldn't stop flowing. Knowing I had to be up early, I tried to sleep, but my mind kept returning to Bob and my drowsiness vanished. Before I knew it, it was morning and I hadn't slept a wink. I used makeup to hide the redness around my eyes from crying, and started preparing for the day. "Good morning, breakfast is ready," I called out cheerfully to my children, trying to act as usual. "Mom, are you okay? Your eyes are red. Be alright?" I had tried to act strong in front of the kids, but they looked worried. I couldn't hide my bloodshot eyes and had caused them concern. "It's okay, honey. I just stayed up late last night, so I might be a bit tired." "Oh, Mom, you gotta get proper sleep," I replied with a smile, and the kids mimicked my tone, saying the same thing and laughed, looking relieved. After seeing off the kids, I decided to take a break because my in-laws were concerned. Maybe because I had moved around to prepare for the kids' morning, this time I fell asleep instantly. I wished that the events of the night had just been a dream, and as I lay down, my consciousness faded instantly. I had planned to rest for a short while, but ended up sleeping until the evening. My father-in-law had picked up the kids from kindergarten, and my mother-in-law had prepared dinner. "I'm so sorry for sleeping so much." "Thank you," I apologized as I immediately helped my mother-in-law and carried on as usual. When night fell and the kids were asleep, I spoke to my in-laws about my thoughts on the future. "I don't think I can live with Bob anymore, so I'm considering getting a divorce." At first I was shocked and bewildered, but I couldn't see myself forgiving a husband like Bob, who could lie like that. I felt bad for my kind in-laws, but I couldn't imagine continuing my marriage with Bob. "We're truly sorry for what our son has done. We're truly sorry." My in-laws seemed remorseful about Bob's actions and offered to help with the divorce proceedings. And Bob would be returning from abroad in a month, so I decided to quickly prepare everything by then. The next day, I immediately consulted with a lawyer known for handling infidelity and divorce cases. Also, Bob was quite active on social media, posting about his life abroad. He had been posting photos from overseas, and our kids enjoyed seeing them. I thought he might be careful about it, but since his partner seemed to be a foreigner, I thought there might be some clues on his social media. So I checked. After investigating, I found the woman he was seeing and hired a private investigator to identify her. Turns out, she worked at the same company as Bob and was a local employee there. So I explained the situation to Bob's company and asked for their cooperation. Bob had always been a straight shooter, so they didn't believe it initially. However, after showing them the video evidence, they understood and offered their support. I also informed my brother and some close friends about the whole thing. Everyone was skeptical at first, but after showing them the video, they all sided with me. That guy, even with a family, what was he thinking, betraying like that? Especially my brother, who was close to Bob and trusted him with me, was quite furious. Though it was just a month's time, being a homemaker gave me the flexibility to prepare, and with the video evidence at hand, I managed to get everything ready for the divorce. With the support of my in-laws, and by splitting up the necessary tasks, we managed to finish everything before Bob's return. However, explaining to the kids was a real challenge. They were attached to Bob and were eagerly waiting for his return. If I didn't tell them we wouldn't see him anymore, even after the divorce, they might still want to live with him. But, considering their young age, I softly explained the situation with Bob and managed to convince them that we couldn't live with him any longer. "Your dad, you see, he told us a very bad lie, and I just can't forgive him. so we can't live with him anymore. Really? Well, okay then. Since Bob had been away on work abroad before, they thought it was just another one of those times. They'll probably understand better as they grow. For now, they seem to accept the fact that they won't be living with Bob. Having finished all the preparations, I invited the newly returned Bob for a meal, saying it's been a while. I told him to meet at a private dining room in a restaurant. To Bob's surprise, not just me and the in-laws, but also some company executives and a lawyer were present in the room. By the way, my kids were with my brother, who feared he might hit Bob if he saw him. What's going on? Why are all these people here? In front of all these unexpected faces, Bob asked with a puzzled look. The lawyer began explaining about his infidelity and the divorce. I haven't cheated. There must be some mistake. Bob vehemently denied, acting like a victim. Even when confronted with photos of the other woman, he insisted they were just colleagues, and she was simply helping him adjust to life abroad. My husband desperately tried to explain himself, and had I not known any better, I might have thought it was all a misunderstanding. Seeing Bob lie so effortlessly, a chill ran down my spine. Do you still say the same after seeing this? Losing patience, my father-in-law, trying to keep his anger in check, showed the video evidence. Bob, clearly agitated, started to panic. How did you get this? He asked. I didn't think I was being filmed. His employers then told him they couldn't trust him anymore, and notified him of his termination. My in-laws were furious with Bob, my husband, and confronted him. No, family is everything, he pleaded. Trust me, I'm not gonna get a divorce. I looked at Bob coolly, wondering what he was trying to say now. We'll discuss the divorce in detail later, I calmly said to a flustered Bob before leaving the room. That night, Bob came to the house where we had lived with my in-laws, hoping to talk to me. However, my children and I had already moved out. Through connections from my father-in-law, we were introduced to a secure and comfortable property, and we had moved immediately. I didn't want to see Bob anymore, so I made a snap decision to move. I felt guilty about having to change schools and daycares for the kids. They seemed fine with it, which was a relief. Bob came over and wanted to know where our new place was, but my in-laws firmly refused to tell him and gave him a piece of their mind. Bob apparently left after that. He kept sending persistent messages afterward, but I only responded about the divorce mediation and ignored the rest. He kept sending messages full of excuses. It was annoying, thinking if he didn't want this, he shouldn't have cheated in secret. Furthermore, my mother-in-law informed me that a neighbor had spotted Bob near the school and kindergarten. He was probably waiting outside to catch a glimpse of our kids and talk to me. Hearing this, I was relieved we had moved to a distant area. A few days later, at the divorce mediation, Bob had lawyered up well, and we finalized the divorce smoothly. I claimed a portion of our assets, and gained custody of all 3 kids. It was also decided I would receive child support. Bob pleaded, please don't divorce me. I'll never cheat again. I've been good until now, right, Chance? It was just a lapse in judgment. But it was too late. You enjoyed yourself abroad without me. I don't want to see your face anymore. Bob tried to cling, but I had no trust left for him and brushed him off coldly. However, he insisted on seeing the kids periodically. I didn't want them to meet Bob, but he does have the right to see them post-divorce. And if the kids wanted to, I felt it would be cruel to stop them. So we decided that whenever Bob meets the kids, my in-laws or my brother would be present. After the divorce, Bob, not giving up, asked friends to mediate, playing the victim. However, since I had explained the situation to them in advance, they refused him. If I hadn't informed them, they might have felt sorry for Bob, leading to further issues. I was truly glad I had informed those around me about everything. Bob was once seen as a diligent worker and a loving father. But now everyone knew about his lies and infidelity. He had no allies. His friends distanced themselves, my in-laws kept their distance, and Bob became increasingly isolated. Currently, Bob has almost run out of savings and he has child support to pay, so he's been working non-stop. Because his previous professional circle knows about his actions, he's taken a full-time job in a different field. He's also juggling multiple part-time jobs. In the beginning, he was excited to see the kids, but as they grew, they understood what he had done, and the meetings became less frequent. I'm not sure about his mistress since she's abroad, but I heard she received a warning from her employer. She's still overseas, so I hope at the very least, she's learned her lesson about getting involved with a married man. The life after the divorce is comfortable with the asset division and child support. Considering my children's future, I started working again. It was tough on my own, but with my brother's help I managed to raise them well. Currently, I live on my own in a town a bit away from the city where it's not too inconvenient. Since I've shifted to remote work, I spend a lot of time at home. Now that my children have grown and moved out, I have more free time. I'm enjoying a relaxed life gardening. Occasionally my children visit with my grandchildren. I look forward to treating them to meals I've prepared, savoring my peaceful retirement. It's thanks to me that you're alive, you parasite. If you have a problem, then divorce me and get out. In John's eyes, the kindness that was evident when we first met was now gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. The glasses he wore and the tie around his neck looked rather expensive, making it clear just how self-centered John had become, just from his appearance and behavior. Fine, I'll leave. I said that, packed my things and left immediately, and I vowed to retaliate against John. My name is Linda. I work as an administrative assistant in a company and live with my mother. Although I seem pretty ordinary, there's one thing about me that sets me apart from everyone else. That is, I use a wheelchair. In fact, due to a traffic accident I had in my student days, I had to live my life in a wheelchair, even though I wasn't fatally injured. When I first started using a wheelchair, there was a lot I had to get used to, and it was quite challenging. But you know, people are resilient, and once you've spent enough time in a wheelchair you get the hang of it. Sometimes I wonder if this is what folks would call a silver lining in a cloud. To be able to think that way probably means I've come to a good place, mentally. But just going to work and coming back home isn't enough to make life fulfilling. So my favorite pastime was going to the local library in town to read. I've loved books since I was a kid, and even now as an adult, I'm still a bookworm. And that day too I was at the library, but on that day, there was a medium-sized rock at the entrance for some reason, and I had trouble getting past it. The one who helped me was John. With his help, I could enter the library without a hitch. From then on, I often saw John at the library, and eventually we started dating and finally got married. And so I began living with John. But after a while, John made a surprising proposal. Linda, I want you to take good care of our home, and I want you to be my rock. So, I'd like you to be a stay-at-home wife. Please? Wait, a stay-at-home wife? John suddenly pleaded with me to become a stay-at-home wife, but to be honest, I really didn't want to quit my job. But John kept asking me over and over to be a stay-at-home wife, so in the end I gave in. My colleagues never expected me to resign and tried hard to convince me to stay. But at the time, I prioritized my husband's wish over everything. In fact, just the act of telling the company I wanted to resign was exhausting, and by the time I did resign, I was mentally drained. Since I quit my job, life has felt dull and uninteresting. Out of boredom, I called my old college friend Alicia to vent, but she was quite critical of my feelings. In this day and age, where both men and women usually work, husbands who ask their working wives to become stay-at-home wives are rare. Linda, you're blessed, and you should be more grateful for your current situation. Alicia, unlike me, always talks about wanting to quit her job. It was clear that we had contrasting views. I had hoped Alicia might at least pretend to empathize with my frustrations, but she completely shut me down, leaving me feeling lonely. The allowance John gives me for household expenses is minimal, and I've had to be very frugal. When it wasn't enough, I had to dip into the savings I had accumulated when I was working full-time. Because of that, I was determined to not overspend and started cutting back significantly on my beauty expenses. Still, my savings were dwindling. Watching the balance decrease became a sad daily ritual, leaving me in a sour mood. But I found it hard to voice these concerns to my hardworking family, so I kept silent. So without my fulfilling job and having to skimp on beauty expenses, the only joy left in my life was borrowing books from the library. Libraries are great, right? Being able to borrow books for free is awesome. At that time, I was more focused on saving money, and the joy of reading was overshadowed by the fact that I was borrowing books for free. It was a bit of a shock to realize how having less money could change one's perspective so much. Nowadays, with streaming services, you can listen to music for free, and there are definitely more free entertainment options than a few years ago. But no matter how many free entertainment options there are, the reality of having less money still brings down your spirits. Even in such a situation, I still loved John. I didn't want to bring up anything with John that could lead to an argument, even if it meant distancing myself from him. For that reason, I never told John about the lack of household allowance. Instead, I silently endured, escaping reality by immersively reading books while listening to free music. However, after a while, John started coming home late more frequently. Concerned, I asked John, "You've been coming home late recently. Is something wrong?" To which John replied, "Work's been busy and I've been doing overtime. Sorry for making you worry." Honestly, in this modern age where overtime is becoming rare, I wondered if he could really be working late so often. But given that I was relying on him for our living expenses, I found it hard to question him further and let the matter slide. But one day, John unexpectedly stayed out overnight. Feeling suspicious, I checked John's phone while he was in the shower. To my dismay, it was full of evidence that John had been cheating on me. Moreover, it seemed that the woman he was seeing had been in a relationship with him, even before we got married. Even after finding undeniable proof, I didn't have the courage to confront John about his infidelity. I guess, back then, I was still in love with him and couldn't muster the strength. However, I was hurt by his betrayal and saved the evidence of his affair on my phone. The revelation of John's cheating devastated me. On top of that, there was no sign of him increasing the allowance he gave me. Even though we were married, I wondered why I was the only one enduring such misery. Overthinking the situation gave me migraines, adding to my worries. Life felt so terrible. Yet every morning I had to prepare breakfast and lunch for John. By that time I had grown weary of making meals for him, wondering why I even had to cater to such man, often sighing in frustration. John seemed oblivious to how I felt, quietly eating his breakfast and heading off to work with his packed lunch. He's probably going to come home late again, I thought, sighing once more. But surprisingly, John came home early that day and dined with me. However, he began criticizing me, saying the dinner today tastes off. And you're my wife, you should try to look prettier. Looking back, John might have been having dinner at his mistress's house, which could have been why he was coming home late. So, without realizing it, he might have been comparing me to his mistress, which is probably why he made such comments to me. I finally lost my temper and shouted at him. "After all the effort I put into making dinner, all you do is complain. Plus, I know about your affair. The reason I can't always look my best is that you barely give me enough money to get by. I've been using up my savings from when I was single because what you give isn't enough. I was better off when I was working and single." John, realizing that I knew of his affair, impulsively picked up a vase nearby and splashed its water at me. I was trembling, both with rage and fear from his unexpected behavior. John, seeming completely unapologetic, said, "You're just a leech living off me. If you've got a problem, divorce me and leave." His eyes, once filled with kindness when we first met, now appeared cold and distant. Looking closer, I could tell that even the glasses and tie John was wearing seemed expensive. Just by his appearance and behavior alone, it was clear how self-centered he was. "Well, I'm leaving," I said, quickly packed my things and left right away, and I swore to myself that I would get back at John. Although John clearly saw me leave the house, he made no move to stop me. In fact, he had an expression that almost seemed grateful I was going. I was shocked by how much John had changed. It chilled my heart to realize how quickly love can fade, even after we had been so in love when we got married. I think I was probably crying at that moment. By the time the taxi I caught reached my parents' home, my tears had stopped, but the emptiness remained. My mother greeted me with surprise but warmth. "I don't know what happened, but come on inside." "Thank you, Mom." "It's okay, honey. We're family, it's what we do." "Yeah, thank you so much." The moment my mother hugged me, I started crying again. I thought my love for John had long since faded, yet I still found myself crying over him. Maybe deep down, I didn't want to leave John, and was shocked by our separation. With so many emotions swirling inside me, my mother held me close, never letting go. Wrapped in my mother's love, I felt alive again, and an overwhelming sense of happiness. Something must have really hurt you. Seeing me cry, my mother stroked my head just like she used to when I was little. We went inside, and my mother tried to distract me with some funny TV shows and offered me some oranges she had gotten from a neighbor. By the time I finished the oranges, the TV show that came on was a comedy show that John and I used to watch together. It was a simple show where a humorous host chatted with comedians and celebrities. We really loved it. I was just silently watching that show, but I must have had a somber look on my face. Seeing me like that, my mother must have become worried and asked, "Linda, did something happen with John?" "There's been a lot, Mom. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin." "Oh, I see. It's okay, Linda. Take your time and tell me at your own pace, okay?" "Yeah, I'll do that." With that, I told my mother everything that had happened. After listening to my entire story, my mother was livid. "I can't believe someone would make my Linda feel this way. You can stay here as long as you want and relax. It must have been hard on you." "Thanks, Mom. So, you're close with John's mom since you both went to the same school. Could you maybe mention what John did to me?" "Got it. I'll talk to her the next time we see each other." "Leave it to me." Thanks to my mother talking to my mother-in-law, John got into big trouble. I had a missed call from John on my phone. When I called back, John shouted angrily, "The allowance I was getting from my parents suddenly stopped, and it's causing me problems. You had something to do with it, didn't you?" Apparently, John had some debts from gambling, and he had been using about 70% of his salary and the entire allowance from his parents to pay it off. Due to the sudden stop in his allowance, he was clearly panicking. Though it was due to my mother's interference that John's allowance was cut off, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy. Bye." With that, I hung up. I felt a bit relieved, knowing John was facing consequences for his actions. I was facing this predicament, but I wasn't completely at peace. The resentment I had towards John kept building up, and my stress had solidified over time. Just a little revenge wasn't going to be enough to ease it. And the thing is, when people have too much time on their hands, they tend to obsess over petty things. Of course, I was no exception. As days went by, my grudge against John only deepened, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I could have vented to my mother, but I felt bad complaining about the same thing repeatedly, and I already knew her response would be predictable. So I decided to reach out to my old friend Alicia. Alicia responded immediately, and I could tell she was doing well. "I've got something to tell you. Want to grab a coffee sometime?" I suggested, and Alicia agreed enthusiastically. As the day approached to meet Alicia, I felt excited. It made me realize how much I enjoy social interactions. Just thinking about what to wear was exhilarating. On the day of our meetup, Alicia and I met up and went to a nearby cafe. There, I told Alicia everything about what John had done, and the current situation. "I see, that sounds tough." "Yeah. And John would give me so little for household expenses, but he always bought expensive stuff for himself. His glasses had all these fine details and embellishments, and his tie was made of what seemed to be expensive fabric with beautiful red and blue stripes." As I described the unique features of John's belongings, Alicia seemed to recall something and went silent for a moment. After taking a deep breath, she asked me, "Hey Linda, can you tell me your husband's name? I feel like I might know him." "Oh really? You know him?" "His name is John Martinez." "I do know him. Wow, John Martinez is my boss. I really don't like him. He's so annoying and nitpicky, and his instructions at work are hard to understand." I had no idea. "But how did you figure it out?" "Well, I happened to remember my boss wearing a distinctive tie that looked expensive. So when you mentioned a similar tie, I just thought, maybe, and bingo." I was shocked. "I see. So, can you spread the word at the company about how messed up John is?" "That sounds good, If all goes well, he might quit, and you can get back at him. I'd be happy to help. And so, Alicia began to spread rumors about John being an unreliable husband at the office. Gradually, the news spread throughout the company. By that time, John felt like he was walking on eggshells, finding it difficult to be at work. After a while, I started receiving emails from him. The emails were about how he felt uncomfortable at the office and didn't know what to do. For my part, I felt like shouting at John. Shouting at John? Why should I care? If you hadn't done what you did to me, none of this would have happened. It's all your own doing. But I didn't want anything to do with John, so I ignored the emails. However, it's strange how men act. The moment a woman stops chasing after them, they start chasing the woman. I've read about this phenomenon in many relationship advice books, but I never thought it would actually happen to me. Probably because I had been ignoring John's emails, I received another email from him. After some thought, I realized that I need you, Linda. I want to discuss our future and try to start over. Please, can we meet? I could feel the desperation in John's message, and by the time I finished reading, I was completely drained. Even a single email from John could ruin the good mood my mother and Alicia had set for me. Such power he had. Now, how to deal with this email? I did think about ignoring it again, but on second thought, John and I are technically still married. Honestly, I wished I could erase the fact that I registered our marriage with someone who brings me down. I even wanted to divorce him right away. So, thanks to John's email, I finally made up my mind to get a divorce. I acted swiftly. Alright, if we involve our parents in the discussion, I'm okay with meeting you. And that's how I responded to John immediately. Soon after, I received a reply from John, and I was able to get his approval. I bet John probably thinks that because I'm seriously considering our future together, that's why I've said I want to discuss things involving both our families. He's likely in La La Land, completely misunderstanding the situation. As for me, I was in the middle of a triumphant pose, having successfully led John to that mistaken belief. I had been strategizing with my mother about how we'd teach John a lesson, and my mother had shared the plan with my mother-in-law. Then, surprisingly, my father-in-law also decided to join our strategy. It seemed that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were appalled at John's irresponsibility and bad character. They no longer saw him as their son. That's probably why they sided with me in this situation. So, with everyone except John, we kept discussing and refining our plan. On the day of the confrontation, my mother and I headed to the house where John lived. Upon arrival, John greeted us with a smile, but I felt a chill. Already in the living room were my mother-in-law and father-in-law. When everyone had gathered, John began to speak. Linda, would you live with me in this house again? No, I want a divorce. I calmly responded and began laying out the lawyer's business card and various pieces of evidence of his affairs on the table. Seeing this, John paled as my mother-in-law and father-in-law started to confront him. Started berating him. How could you, as a man, let Linda go through all that? I never thought you'd turn out to be such a loser. We're done with you. Really, I don't want to see your face anymore, John. Ah, Linda, you can always rely on me, okay? With that, John was berated by his parents, got a firm disownment, and in the end, it was settled that he'd divorce me. Tell me it's a lie. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. Please, everyone, forgive me. John's pitiful voice echoed throughout the living room. Afterwards, my divorce from John went through smoothly, and a little later, when I informed Alicia about it, she said she had some news too. Given the cheeriness in Alicia's voice, I thought maybe she was going to get married, but that wasn't the case. Turns out Alicia joyfully informed me that John had quit his job. According to Alicia's story, after John and I divorced, he felt increasingly uncomfortable at work and eventually chose to resign voluntarily. Well, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with that annoying boss nitpicking or taking those lousy job instructions anymore. It feels like a thanks for letting me go moment. Alicia's carefree voice came over the phone. As for me, hearing about John's voluntary resignation, I felt a mix of happiness and emptiness. I didn't like John anymore, but he was once someone I loved. The fact that he left his job because of our issues weighed on me a bit. But John not only subjected me to financial abuse, but also cheated on me. Maybe it was some kind of divine retribution. At least, that's how I tried to see it. Plus, John divided the property appropriately. Rumor has it that John is working day and night to pay off his debts and cover his living expenses. It seems like fitting punishment for him, if you ask me. As for myself, I've been living with my mother as usual. But I realized I couldn't keep doing that forever, so I started working as a full-time office worker again. Having had experience in administrative roles, I got hired quickly. My company regards me as an immediate asset, and they rely on me. Contrary to popular belief, office work can be pretty intricate when you get into the details. We administrative staff need to communicate well, teach each other, and sometimes cover for someone on maternity leave. Teamwork is essential. Working like this, naturally I became close with my coworkers. That's why I really enjoy my job. Even when I come home tired, my mother, unchanged from those days, warmly welcomes me and has dinner ready. Having dinner with my mother, we chat about what happened at work today or engage in some lighthearted banter. I truly enjoy these moments. Frankly, my married life with John lacked these warm moments. It was pretty bland. So I cherish this happiness every day, living joyfully with my mother. I can't thank you enough to my mother. Daddy always buys me candies. I couldn't believe my kind husband, who cares so much for our daughter, would do something like this. At this point, I was still unaware of the true meaning behind his overtime work. My name is Natalie Thompson. I am 36 years old. My husband Ken and I have been married for 6 years, and we have a 4-year-old daughter. I am a mother, but also a surgeon. I have been busy with my work since we got married. Ken, aware of my busy schedule, said, "Let's work through this together." And so we got married. Later on, we were able to have a child. I went back to work shortly after our daughter was born. I wanted to watch our daughter grow a little more, but my job was so demanding that I couldn't take much time off. Despite my busy days, I don't think I've neglected my daughter, and I believe I've given her plenty of love. I think Ken is very supportive when it comes to parenting. He makes time to play with our daughter, and even when I'm not around, he can almost perfectly handle bathing her and getting her dressed. Our 4-year-old daughter loves her dad. Ken has his own job and it must be tough for him, but since our daughter was born, he has been very considerate of my busy work schedule. I have some late nights at work. Even when I'm home, I often have to work. Still, Ken always tells me, "Don't overdo it. I'll take care of our daughter." I took comfort in Ken's words, but I didn't know yet. I couldn't believe that my kind husband was doing something like this. Our daughter attends daycare, and I usually drop her off in the morning while Ken, who has a more flexible schedule, picks her up. Since she's been going to daycare since she was a baby, she has many friends. She even says she wants to go to daycare on her days off because she enjoys it so much. What I looked forward to the most each day was hearing stories about my daughter's day at daycare after I got home from work. She would tell me stories about playing with her friends at daycare, like building sandcastles or racing to the park, and she would always talk about her time with Ken as well. "Today Daddy and I went shopping for dinner," she would say with a smile. She always seemed so happy when she talked about it, which made me feel warm inside. I couldn't be more thankful to Ken, who is doing such a great job with our daughter. I had never heard Ken mention having to work overtime before. His company, being relatively large, seemed to encourage employees to have a good work-life balance. Employees were encouraged to leave work on time, so Ken rarely came home late. But one day, he texted me saying he had to work late and asked if I could pick up our daughter. Fortunately, I was able to arrange my schedule that day and picked her up instead of Ken. Until then, Ken had always been the one to pick her up because of his flexible schedule, so I hadn't heard him mention overtime work before. I thought maybe he had been managing to adjust his schedule all this time, even when it was difficult. At the time, I didn't think much of it. When Ken came home, I asked him, "Have you been adjusting your schedule to pick up our daughter even when you're busy?" After a brief pause, he replied, "It's been a bit busier lately." Ken has a managerial position, so he has a lot of responsibilities. I told him, "If I can arrange my schedule, I'll pick her up, so let me know if you're having a tough time." My husband just said thank you and played with our daughter. After telling him this, he gradually started asking me to pick up our daughter more frequently. I thought it was unavoidable due to work, so I explained the situation to my workplace, arranged time to pick up my daughter, and asked my mother at home to help until I finished work. This went on for 2 months. Eventually, I couldn't take time off every time, so I asked my husband if there was any other way. He then said, "I have a position too, I can't keep saying that. Taking care of the child is a mother's job, right?" I was surprised because he had never said anything like that before. I wondered what had suddenly happened. I thought he might have become harsh due to stress and busyness. However, this incident changed my husband's attitude towards me. Until now, he used to help with household chores and child rearing when I was busy with work, but he stopped doing anything at all. He became busier and couldn't manage everything. I thought I should do whatever I could. However, there were times when I couldn't handle all the housework. Even when I asked for help, he recently started saying, "It's because you prioritize your work." I understood that, but the fact is, I can't neglect my work when I have patients. He should understand that since he married me, so why suddenly say such a thing? I had one guess. It was that my husband had often tried to talk to me at night. I had been saying I was busy with work or had work left. Admittedly, my husband hasn't been a priority lately. I'm busy, and since our daughter was born, I haven't felt that way. If I have time for my husband, I'd rather rest, to be honest. I hadn't realized that this was the reason I was coming home late. Lately, my husband often said he would be late because he was busy at work. I thought it was unusual after so many years, but I couldn't say anything because I had relied on him too much. However, we have a daughter, so we have no choice but to cooperate. I told my husband that I didn't need him to pick up our daughter every time, but I wanted him to make time somehow. After thinking for a while, he reluctantly agreed. Since then, I haven't heard him say he's working overtime as much. He's been picking up our daughter properly. I felt bad for putting all the burden on my husband, so I told him to adjust within his limits. He just said he understood. However, his attitude towards me remained the same. I wondered why my husband's attitude had changed, but it didn't take long to find out. One day, I was able to finish work earlier than usual. That day, there was no message from my husband saying he would be late due to overtime, so I was a little excited to spend time with my family. My husband usually buys ready-made meals or quickly prepares food. I always rely on my husband, so I decided to cook homemade food after a long time. I wanted to make a lot of their favorite dishes. I was desperately thinking about the menu on my way home. It was time for my daughter and husband to come home, so I finished shopping for dinner and hurried home. Today I can get home early and listen to my daughter's stories slowly. My daughter, who always wants to help, will probably want to cook together. I was excited. After my daughter went to bed, I thought about having a drink with my husband. I opened the front door with such thoughts. I checked if my daughter and husband had come home. But I felt something was wrong. For some reason, the shoes were arranged differently than usual. I thought my daughter had lined up the shoes I had forgotten to put away. I cautiously looked at the shoes in the entrance again and saw my daughter's and husband's familiar shoes. So far, everything was normal. But there was also a pair of shoes with a design that young girls would like. Why are these shoes at our house? Before I could understand what was happening, I hurried into the house and went to the living room. When I quietly opened the living room door, my daughter was eating snacks and watching TV alone. "Welcome back, Mom. You're home early today. What's going on?" I asked my daughter, confused. "Daddy is working with someone from his office in the room upstairs, so I'm just waiting and watching TV," she replied. Hearing that, I got goosebumps. From the shoes at the entrance and my daughter's words, I could sense that something was wrong. No, it can't be. Would my husband, who cares about our daughter, do something like this? I went upstairs, trying not to think too much and holding my breath. And then I confirmed that there was some noise coming from a room. I hesitated for a moment, but then I forcefully opened the door of that room. My head went blank, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. There I saw a sight I didn't even want to imagine: my husband and another woman. "Hey Natalie, what are you doing here?" "It's not what are you doing here, is it?" What are you doing in our bedroom? Who is that woman? And what do you mean by leaving our daughter alone in the living room? I couldn't stop talking, just get dressed quickly and explain. My hand trembled with anger as I closed the door. Leaving our 4-year-old daughter alone in the living room, what was this man thinking? Moreover, bringing a woman into our house, and into the bed, where our whole family sleeps. After a while, when I opened the door, the two were sitting side by side, dressed. What does this mean? I asked, pretending to be calm. Well, this is... At first, my husband Ken tried to make an excuse, but then the woman beside him whispered, "Is that your wife?" And he suddenly said to me, "It's because you're always working and never paying attention to me. This is your own fault." That's right. Poor Ken. Well, it seems like he doesn't see you as a woman anymore, old lady. That's right. Now that you understand, get out quickly. What is he talking about? While thinking that in the back of my mind, I was already running down the stairs before he finished talking. I wanted to retort more, but I was not in the mood due to anger and sadness. I just wanted to get away from there as quickly as possible. Then, while eating snacks and sitting cutely watching TV, I told my daughter, "Let's go out." My daughter asked without hesitation, "Where's Daddy?" "Daddy is busy with work." It was hard to explain to my daughter, and I held back my tears of anger and headed for my parents' house. In the car, I asked my daughter, "Has Daddy ever said he was working with a woman at home after picking you up from daycare?" "Yes. He said it was important work, so I had to watch TV quietly." "And don't tell Mommy. If you can keep it a secret, you can eat snacks. Amy and Daddy always bought me lots of snacks." "I'm sorry, Mommy." My daughter called the woman Amy. "Do you know the name of the lady?" My daughter was a quick learner. She remembered the woman's name and told me. I felt guilty and angry at my daughter's innocent words, and the tears I had been holding back came out. My husband, who had bribed a small child. A small child was bribed with snacks to keep quiet, and a woman was brought into our home several times while being left alone in the room. This was unforgivable, and it made me start thinking about how to get back at those two. I decided to consult someone, and there is always one person I turn to first when I have a problem: my boss at work. He introduced us and knows my husband's company well. He has always been a trustworthy person, who sincerely listens to my problems since I started working. I told him about what happened, and the woman's name. My boss listened seriously but didn't say much. He just listened to my story and then went back to work. A week later, my boss called me. I thought it was about the consultation, but he had secretly investigated. It turned out that the woman my husband was having an affair with was a student working part-time at my husband's company. I was very sad that a student had stolen my husband, but the thought of my husband being infatuated with that student gave me goosebumps. My boss introduced me to someone whom I had consulted, the hospital director, whom I also knew. I was wondering why the director was introduced to me when my boss said, actually, I was consulted by the director as well. It seems that his daughter is not attending school much and he's wondering what to do. It's surprising that she is not only skipping school but also having an affair. My boss seemed surprised as well. It turned out that the daughter, whom the director had consulted about, was the woman with whom my husband was having an affair. I thought the world was a small place. According to my boss, the woman my husband was having an affair with is a medical student aiming to become a doctor. I wondered why she was working part-time at my husband's company, which is not related to medicine. However, it didn't take long to find out. I decided to wait near my husband's office. I was surprised that I was trying to meet the woman my husband was having an affair with, but I had no intention of backing down. Then the woman appeared. When she noticed me, she said, What, a middle-aged woman waiting? She can say whatever she wants. Today, you are not with my husband, are you? The woman laughed snidely and said with a composed expression, I'm not with him every day. But sorry for stealing your high-income husband, old lady. While thinking that I earn more than my husband, I continued, I heard you are a medical student. Why are you working part-time at my husband's company, which has nothing to do with being a doctor? The woman, looking shocked, glared at me as if to say, You researched that much? Ken kept saying he wanted me near him. He was persistent. But Ken buys me anything. It's nice to have a high-income boyfriend. The woman seemed to consider my husband as nothing more than a cash cow. I felt a bit sorry for my husband, who didn't know he was thought of in that way. But that didn't matter anymore. If you are aiming to be a doctor, shouldn't you be going to school and studying properly? Why do I have to be told what to do by an old lady like you? Can you stop picking on me just because your husband was stolen? It's my business, isn't it? When I told her that her father was worried about her, the woman's face started to turn pale. Why are you bringing up my father? Don't say careless things without knowing anything. I made a call to someone on the spot, and within a minute, the director appeared. As soon as the director saw me, he apologized, saying, "I am truly sorry for my daughter." The woman, who didn't understand why her father was there, was flustered. "I heard everything. What are you doing? Not going to school and playing with someone else's husband? What's fun about that?" The woman's father, the director, seemed to be a very strict person, and she seemed unable to talk back. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know he was married." She was desperately trying to make excuses, even at this point. But the director had heard the entire conversation between us. "Whether he was married or not, what you are doing is pathetic." And there was no excuse that would work. Afterwards, the woman, who couldn't say anything to her father, was taken home by the director. I had planned this day with the director immediately after my boss introduced us. When I told the director about my husband, he held his head in his hands, saying, "I can't believe my daughter is doing such a pathetic thing." And then he said, "I will scold my daughter properly, so please demand compensation or anything you need." I once thought that it would be unreasonable to demand compensation from a student, but considering the director's feelings, I decided to demand it properly. I returned home after a month. It seems that my husband is feeling down, maybe because he lost contact with the woman he was having an affair with. During this month, he did not apologize to me at all, only contacted me about our daughter. He probably thought I would come back eventually and waited carelessly. I have been preparing for divorce this past month. I am also considering taking a significant amount of money from both of them. Of course, I will make my husband pay child support. I placed the business card of my divorce lawyer and a settlement document regarding child support and property division in front of my husband. I remember reading somewhere that it's good to prepare a settlement document to make sure you get paid properly. It said that if you do not get paid properly, you may face difficulties in the future. If you do not receive payment, you can take legal action. I have lost trust in my husband due to this incident, and I wanted to seek revenge by being thorough. I consulted with my lawyer multiple times and created a settlement document. When my husband saw the business card and settlement document, he quickly said, "I don't want a divorce." He insisted that he only met the woman once. But I told him that our daughter said she had been coming and going from our house multiple times and had even bribed her with candy. Do you believe what a 4-year-old child says more than me? That's impossible. I trust Mindy more than you. I won't forgive you for belittling Mindy just because she's a child. It seemed like my husband was angry that I believed our daughter more than him. No matter what I said, he insisted it was only once, so I presented a recording I secretly made when he met the woman. "You met Amy behind my back and even recorded it? I didn't know you had the courage to do such a thing." He seemed to be belittling me, and he was confident that the woman wouldn't say anything bad about him. However, when he heard the woman referring to him as a cash cow, he was shocked. He was in love with her. Unable to make excuses, my husband bowed his head in silence. I said firmly, "I don't want to waste any more time on you, so sign the settlement document quickly." Reluctantly, he signed the document. Later, I visited my boss, who had advised me, and reported the situation, expressing my gratitude. My boss told me that when I mentioned the woman's name, he recognized it and immediately understood the situation. Thanks to my boss, I was able to get a divorce. Afterward, the divorce was finalized. I demanded money from both my husband and the woman he had an affair with. I got custody of our daughter. My husband, who loves our daughter despite what he did, begged me to let him see her until the end. But I firmly refused. not wanting my daughter to see a man who had a relationship with another woman while leaving her behind. My husband was disheartened, but he couldn't afford to be down because he had to work hard to pay child support. It seems that the woman was severely scolded by her father after that. Her father found out she was neglecting school and getting involved with men, and told her, "Can someone like you handle a job where you are responsible for people's lives? If you are serious, retake the entrance exam." He also told her to drop out and repay the tuition. It seems the woman is working hard to earn money to pay back her father for the tuition and my consolation money. As for me, I'm still busy, but I make sure to spend quality time with my daughter, and I feel fulfilled.